a series on understanding Putin and the war in Ukraine. On August 9, 1999, when President Boris Yeltsin appeared on television, the Russian people had come to expect one thing. He was about to fire another prime minister. In the preceding 18 months, the position had become a revolving door, with 4 different men holding the title. The power games in the Kremlin had devolved into a farce of mutual blame-shifting. Unsurprisingly, the Yeltsin on-screen not only dismissed Prime Minister Sergei Stepashin after just 3 months on the job, but also announced the appointment of a new one, Vladimir Putin. To most Russians at the time, the name Vladimir Putin was completely foreign. His public image was that of a stone-faced, tight-lipped former KGB officer. He was a spy master, having taken charge of the KGB's successor, the FSB, just 1 year prior. Even Moscow's political elite saw Putin as little more than a scapegoat temporarily brought in from the security services to handle the crisis in Chechnya. But then Yeltsin did something that shocked everyone. In the very same speech, he not only appointed Putin, but openly declared that this 46-year-old relative unknown was his chosen successor. How could a minor Kremlin functionary, a protege of Yeltsin's political rival, who had only entered the Kremlin 2 years earlier, earn such absolute trust? Why would Yeltsin bet the fate of Russia and his own personal safety on this man? To answer that question, we have to go back 3 years, to the summer of Sobchak's failed re-election campaign. The turning point began with the St. Petersburg mayoral election in June 1996. Due to his rivalry with Yeltsin, Putin's mentor and political guide, Anatoly Sobchak, lost Moscow's support and was defeated by his own former deputy. At the time, Putin's greatest political asset was his absolute loyalty. So when the new mayor invited Putin to join his administration, he refused without hesitation, choosing instead to leave City Hall with Sobchak. For the defeated Sobchak, what lay ahead was a storm of political retribution that made a comeback nearly impossible. By sticking with him, Putin, the loyalist, had effectively become an unemployed man with an uncertain future. But just 2 months later, however, an order arrived from Moscow. Putin was suddenly appointed deputy chief of the Presidential Property Management Department. On the surface, the appointment was strange. The Kremlin was consumed by vicious factional infighting. Why would anyone go out of their way to rescue a key aide from a rival camp that had just been defeated? The answer was that Putin's golden reputation for loyalty had, in fact, saved his political career. The key figure who brought Putin to the Kremlin was Anatoly Chubais, Yeltsin's then chief of staff. Chubais, like Sobchak, was part of the democratic reform movement of the early 90s and knew the St. Petersburg team well. In his eyes, Putin possessed 2 key traits that made him an invaluable asset. First, his executive ability was flawless. As first deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, Putin had earned a reputation for being low-profile, pragmatic, and highly effective, successfully handling numerous thorny economic and foreign relations issues. He was a proven manager. Second, his absolute loyalty. Whether it was his decisive stand with Sobchak during the 1991 coup or his immediate resignation after Sobchak's defeat, this refusal to betray his boss, a rare quality in Russian politics, left a deep impression on Chubais and other senior officials. So, Chubais brought Putin to the Kremlin and gave him a minor role. The department Putin joined was responsible for managing the vast state assets Russia had inherited from the Soviet Union. While important, it was not a core decision-making body. But there was a deeper logic to his arrival. After years of rule, Yeltsin had failed to deliver on the promises made after the Soviet collapse. Under his watch, Russia had grown weaker, and talk of holding him accountable as a traitor was beginning to spread. Putin's refusal to abandon Sobchak sent a powerful signal to the Kremlin's inner circle. This is a man who does not betray his superiors. For Yeltsin, who was beginning to worry about his own safety after leaving office, loyal bureaucrats like Putin were essential, a firewall against future prosecution. Appointing Putin to a minor role was, in effect, a way to bring him into the system for observation and testing. Putin's performance in this role was perfect. Unlike many Moscow politicians, he avoided the media spotlight and focused solely on his job. He maintained the meticulous discipline he had learned in the KGB, and his work was flawless. In just 6 months, he was promoted to Deputy Chief of the Presidential Staff and head of the Main Control Directorate. This promotion transformed Putin from a minor player into a key piece in the Kremlin's leadership. The directorate held immense power, overseeing the implementation of presidential decrees across Russia and investigating corruption. It was in this powerful position that Putin faced the ultimate test of his loyalty. In 1997, his mentor, Sobchak, was facing a series of politically motivated corruption investigations and was on the verge of being formally charged and arrested. From a political standpoint, Sobchak was now a massive liability. Any association with the disgraced politician could have ended Putin's career. Yet once again, Putin chose loyalty. He took an enormous risk and, using his influence within the power structure, personally orchestrated an operation to smuggle him out of the country. On November 7, 1997, Putin arranged for a private jet and, under the guise of an emergency medical evacuation, successfully spirited Sobchak away to Paris, saving him from prison. From a legal standpoint, this was a clear abuse of power. But to Yeltsin, this was something else entirely. It proved that Putin was a man who would never, under any circumstances, abandon his boss. For the ailing, scandal-plagued Yeltsin, who was terrified of being prosecuted after his presidency, this was the ultimate insurance policy. The illegal operation, far from being a stain on his record, earned Putin the deepest trust of Yeltsin and his inner circle. Just 6 months later, in May 1998, Putin was promoted again, this time to the even more powerful position of First Deputy Chief of Staff, making him the key figure responsible for keeping Russia's powerful regional governors in line. He had gone from being an object of scrutiny to one of Yeltsin's most trusted confidants. And it was a financial crisis that swept through Russia that would pave Putin's way to the very top. Following the Asian financial crisis, commodity prices plummeted. This crippled Russia's fragile economy, which relied on oil exports for revenue. On the eve of the collapse, July 25, 1998, Yeltsin made a critical appointment. He moved Putin from the presidential staff and named him director of the FSB. For Putin, a former KGB lieutenant colonel, taking the helm of the FSB was tantamount to a homecoming. The wisdom of this move became clear just 3 weeks later. On August 17th, the financial crisis hit full force. The government devalued the ruble and defaulted on its domestic debt. The banking system collapsed, leading to political paralysis. Yeltsin's authority hit rock bottom. Over the next year, in a desperate search for scapegoats, Yeltsin fired 3 prime ministers in quick succession. But this did nothing to solve the underlying problems. As the leadership changes became routine, the public's trust in anyone associated with Yeltsin evaporated. The risk of prosecution for Yeltsin was growing, while his pool of potential successors was shrinking. He desperately needed a strong man with an untarnished image who could stabilize the country. Putin, who had kept a low profile during the crisis, became virtually the only choice. So in August 1999, Yeltsin not only appointed Putin as acting prime minister, but also publicly endorsed him as the next president. For Putin, however, this was the final and greatest test of his political life. Just as he took office, Chechen militants invaded the neighboring Republic of Dagestan, and a cloud of terrorism hung over all of Russia. The humiliating defeat in the First Chechen War was a national shame, and no one believed that a country still reeling from financial collapse could win a second one. For Putin, the stakes were immense. The chances of failure were high, and the consequence would be total political ruin. Victory seemed like a long shot, but the prize was a direct path to the presidency.